Unexpected invitation, the last centerpiece wobbled precariously as Dahlia Winters balanced it against her hip. Fumbling with the staff entrance keycard at Thornfield Botanical Gardens. She was never meant to be here, especially not on the night of the annual Botanical Society Gala. But her boss had called in a panic when the event coordinator discovered 3 arrangements missing from the collection. "Just drop them off at the service entrance," Vivian had instructed over the phone, her voice tight with exhaustion. "Someone will sign for them, and then you can go home." But no one had been at the service entrance, and after 20 minutes of waiting in the chilly April evening, Dahlia had used her contractor's keycard to let herself in. Now, dressed in faded jeans splattered with green stains and a simple blouse with tiny forget-me-nots embroidered along the collar, she navigated the back hallways of the garden's grand conservatory, a place transformed for tonight's black tie fundraiser, through the glass walls, separating staff areas from guest spaces. Dahlia glimpsed women in flowing gowns and men in tailored tuxedos mingling beneath the soaring glass dome, where thousands of fairy lights twinkled among rare orchids. In trailing vines, the centerpieces she'd created intricate arrangements of native wildflowers, each one containing endangered species she'd carefully cultivated. Art adorned every table except 3. "Excuse me," she called to a harried server. "Where should I put these?" "They're the missing centerpieces for tables 14 through 16. The server barely glanced her way. "Staging area by the Neptune fountain, but her eye speeches start in 10 minutes. Dahlia nodded her thanks and slipped through a side door, immediately feeling out of place as she entered the main conservatory. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the space, transforming the botanical sanctuary into an ethereal ballroom. She kept her head down, making a beeline for the fountain where staff bustled about with last-minute preparations. "Those don't go there." A sharp voice cut through the ambient chatter. An elegant woman in a midnight blue gown gestured dismissively at Dahlia. "The caterer's entrance is behind the orchid display." "I'm not a caterer," Dahlia replied quietly. "I'm just delivering the missing centerpieces for, well, wherever they go, get them there quickly. We have guests arriving any minute." Dahlia bit her lip and continued toward the fountain, where she carefully placed her creations on a linen-draped table. As she arranged the last one, adjusting a sprig of rare silvery artemisia, she felt someone watching her. When she looked up, her eyes met the steady gaze of a man standing across the fountain. Unlike the other guests, who seemed determined to outshine one another, he wore a simple black tuxedo with no flashy accessories, yet something about him commanded attention. Perhaps it was the thoughtful intensity in his expression, or the way he stood slightly apart from the chattering crowd. "Those are extraordinary," he said, approaching the table. "It's completely different from the others." Dahlia glanced at her arrangements, seeing them through a stranger's eyes. While the other centerpieces featured showy exotic blooms and gilded branches, hers celebrated the subtle beauty of local ecosystems, delicate ferns unfurling beside, woodland anemones, prairie grasses dancing among fiery Indian paintbrush. "They tell a story," he continued, studying the arrangement closest to him, "about what belongs here. What's native, what's worth protecting." "That was the idea," Dahlia admitted, surprised by his perception, though I don't think anyone else noticed. "Julian Blackwood," he said, extending his hand. "And you are?" "Just leaving," Dahlia replied, wiping her soil-stained fingers on her jeans before reluctantly accepting his handshake. "I'm not supposed to be here." Julian's eyes crinkled. "At the corners? That makes 2 of us, then." Beneath the glass ceiling, I find it hard to believe that Julian Blackwood feels out of place anywhere, Dahlia said, a hint of skepticism in her voice. She'd recognized his name immediately. The Blackwood Foundation funded half the conservation projects in the state, including the rare plant propagation program where she occasionally volunteered. Julian's smile deepened, revealing a small dimple in his left cheek. "When you've attended enough of these functions, you start to see how performative they are. Everyone talking about saving the planet while drinking from single-use champagne flutes." He gestured toward her centerpieces. "But these are honest." Before Dahlia could respond, a bell chimed, signaling guests to find their seats for dinner. She took a step back. "I should go. I've delivered what I came for." "Wait." Julian reached into his jacket and produced an elegant fountain pen and small note card. He scribbled something and handed it to her. My table has an empty seat.
What?
Foundation's publicist caught food poisoning this morning. Dahlia glanced down at the card table 1, directly beneath the podium where speakers would present. Mr. Blackwood, I'm wearing jeans, with dirt on them. Call me Julian, please. His eyes held a mischievous gleam. I've never cared much about dress codes. Besides, anyone who can create those arrangements deserves to be here more than most. Of the people in designer gowns, a voice called his name from across the room. Think about it, he said, then headed toward a cluster of board members waving him over. Dahlia stood frozen, the invitation card between her fingers. She should go home to her tiny apartment above Mrs. Okoy's florist shop, make tea, and finish the botanical illustrations due to her publisher next week. Yet something about Julian's genuine interest in her work held her in place. 20 minutes later, she found herself seated at table 1, having hastily washed her hands and face in the restroom. To her surprise, Julian had arranged for her to be seated beside him rather than in the publicist's assigned spot. Ladies and gentlemen, announced Evelyn Hargrove, the Botanical Society's president, from the podium. Before we begin our fundraising portion of the evening, I'd like to recognize the Blackwood Foundation's unprecedented $10 million commitment to our Seeds of Tomorrow initiative. Applause rippled through the room as Julian nodded graciously, though Dahlia noticed he seemed uncomfortable with the attention. $10 million, she whispered when the applause died down. That could save a lot of endangered species. A start, he replied, though money alone doesn't solve the problem. We need people who understand plants who can tell their stories. He nodded toward her centerpiece. People like you. Throughout dinner, Dahlia found herself drawn into conversation, not just with Julian, but with renowned botanists and conservationists seated at their table. When she shyly mentioned her work illustrating a forthcoming field guide to endangered woodland flora, Dr. Rosalind Paddle, whose research Dahlia had studied in college, asked for her contact information. We're always looking for illustrators who understand plant morphology, Dr. Patel explained. Most artists make everything pretty, but miss the scientific details that matter. As dessert was served, Julian leaned closer. Tell me about your other work, these centerpieces suggest. You're more than just an illustrator. Dahlia hesitated, then found herself describing the community garden she'd started in her urban neighborhood, a former vacant lot transformed into a native plant sanctuary and educational space for local children. The property owner is selling to developers soon, though, she admitted. We have about 6 months left before it becomes luxury condos. Julian's expression darkened. Which development company? Meridian Partners? They own half the neighborhood already? Something flickered in Julian's eyes, but before he could respond, Evelyn Hargrove tapped her glass for attention. And now, we invite Julian Blackwood to say a few words about the Foundation's vision for botanical conservation.
Ow.
Julian squeezed Dahlia's hand briefly before standing. Save that thought, he murmured. I'd like to hear more about your garden. As he walked to the podium, an elegant woman in a crimson gown slipped into his vacant seat. So you're what kept Julian from the VIP reception, she said, her tone coolly appraising. I'm Charlotte Devereaux, Blackwood Foundation board chair. Her gaze swept over Dahlia's casual attire. And you are? Nobody important, Dahlia replied, suddenly acutely aware of her mismatched presence among the glittering crowd. Just a last-minute stand-in. Charlotte's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Julian doesn't invite nobody important to sit beside him at the Foundation's table, especially not someone who looks like they just came from gardening. Before Dahlia could respond, Julian's voice filled the room. But instead of discussing the Foundation's financial commitment, he began speaking about the native plant centerpieces, about how they represented the true mission of conservation. Not just preserving specimens in botanical gardens, but reintegrating them into the landscapes where they belonged. The artist who created these arrangements, Julian continued, understood something many of us have forgotten, that beauty and purpose are intertwined in the natural world. Every plant has a story and a place where it belongs. As applause followed his speech, Dahlia felt Charlotte's gaze intensify. Interesting, the woman murmured. Very interesting indeed. Later, as guests mingled over coffee, Julian found Dahlia by the orchid display, preparing to leave. "Don't go yet," he said. "There's something I'd like to show you." He led her through a door marked staff only and up a narrow spiral staircase that opened onto the conservatory's glass ceiling. Spread before them was a rooftop garden few visitors ever saw, a research space where botanists cultivated endangered species for reintroduction to the wild. "This is what the foundation really supports," Julian explained, his voice soft in the humid air. "Not galas and speeches, but this patient work of bringing plants back from the brink, under the moonlight filtering through the glass panels, surrounded by plants fighting extinction." Dahlia felt something shift between them, a recognition of shared values that transcended their different worlds. "About your community garden," Julian said finally. "I think I might be able to help." Seeds of doubt over the next 2 months. Dahlia's life transformed in ways she never imagined. A courier delivered a business card from Julian with a handwritten note. "The foundation needs an artist who understands. Plants interested?" What began as a freelance illustration project documenting rare species for conservation, grants evolved into regular meetings with Julian. Sometimes they worked in the foundation's sunlit offices downtown. Other times in the community garden, where neighborhood children would gather around, fascinated by the man in expensive clothes who knew the Latin names of weeds growing through sidewalk cracks. "You've made quite an impression on Julian," remarked Tomas Nguyen, Foundation's project director, as they reviewed Dahlia's illustrations of prairie grasses one afternoon. "He's never taken such a personal interest in our documentation projects before." Dahlia felt her cheeks warm. "We just share similar perspectives on conservation." Tomas gave her a knowing smile. "Of course. Though perhaps you should know the board has questions about the sudden priority shift toward urban green spaces." Before she could ask what he meant, Charlotte Devereaux swept into the conference room, her presence immediately commanding attention. "Dahlia, isn't it?" Charlotte's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Julian speaks so highly of your ... artistic talents." Emphasized the word in a way that made it sound trivial. "I wonder if we might have a chat while you're here, once alone." Charlotte dispensed with pleasantries. "Let me be direct. Julian is proposing a major foundation initiative around urban community gardens, starting with saving yours. The board has concerns." "What kind of concerns?" Dahlia asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Julian inherited not just his fortune, but his father's vision for large-scale wilderness preservation. Now suddenly he's diverting resources to vacant lots in the city. Charlotte examined her manicured nails. "One might wonder about the personal motivations behind this shift." "If you're implying I'm not implying anything," Charlotte interrupted smoothly. "I'm simply concerned about Julian. We were engaged once. Did he mention that? I still care deeply about his well-being and his legacy." The revelation struck Dahlia like a physical blow. Julian had never mentioned an engagement to the sophisticated board chair. "The Meridian Partners development that threatens your little garden," Charlotte continued. "The Blackwood Foundation is an investor. Julian's father set up that arrangement years ago, highly profitable and legally binding." "Does Julian know this?" Dahlia asked, her voice barely audible. "Of course. But he's an idealist always looking for loopholes." Charlotte's expression softened slightly. "Oh, you seem like a sensible woman, Dahlia. I'm simply suggesting you consider whether your garden is worth jeopardizing the Foundation's larger mission and Julian's position within it." That evening, Dahlia canceled her plans to meet Julian at the Botanical Gardens. Instead, she walked to her community garden, unlocking the chain-link fence as the setting sun cast long shadows across the raised beds, where neighborhood children had planted sunflowers and beans. In the center of the garden stood a mature silver bell. Try its delicate white flowers, long gone, but its distinctive winged seed pods catching the golden light. Dahlia had discovered it as a struggling sapling when clearing the lot, somehow surviving decades of urban neglect. Now, it provided shade for community gatherings and habitat for songbirds. She touched its trunk, wondering if the developers would cut it down or attempt to transplant it, a procedure few mature trees survived. "I thought I might find you here." Julian stood at the garden gate, concern etched across his features. "Is it true?" Dahlia asked, without preamble. "About the Foundation investing in Meridian Partners?" He didn't pretend not to understand. Yes. My father made many investments I don't agree with, but can't easily unwind. And you didn't think to mention this when I told you about the development threatening the garden? Julian stepped into the space, careful not to disturb a bed of native milkweed. I was trying to find a solution first. The Foundation's legal team is exploring options to either buy out the investment or leverage it to modify Meridian's plans. Charlotte thinks I'm distracting you from the Foundation's real mission, Dahlia said, watching his reaction carefully. A shadow crossed his face. Charlotte believes conservation happens in remote wilderness areas, not where people actually live. It's an old argument between us. Were you engaged to her? The question escaped before Dahlia could reconsider. Julian's surprise was evident. Briefly, years ago, our families expected it, but we wanted different things. He moved closer. Charlotte is an excellent board chair, strategic, connected. But she sees the Foundation as a means to power and influence, not change. In the fading light, surrounded by plants they both sought to protect, Dahlia felt the fragile trust. This is all more complicated than I realized. I understand, he said quietly. But please know, I've been transparent about my intentions from the night we met. It's not just regarding the garden, but about you. After he left, Dahlia remained beneath the silver bell tree until stars appeared above the city's skyline, wondering if some roots, once entangled, could ever truly be separated. Uprooted, the vote was 7-3 against intervention. Tomas informed Dahlia, his voice heavy with regret, as they sat in a corner cafe near the Foundation offices. The board decided the Foundation's investment in Meridian Partners will proceed as planned. 3 weeks had passed since her conversation with Julian in the garden, 3 weeks during which she'd kept her distance, focusing on finishing her illustrations for the field guide while trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest. What about Julian? She asked, stirring her untouched tea. He was so confident he could change their minds. Tomas hesitated. Julian resigned as CEO yesterday. He's still the primary shareholder, but he stepped back from operational decisions. News hit Dahlia like a physical blow, because of the garden, because of me. It's complicated, Tomas said carefully. There's been tension with the board for months over strategic direction. This was just the breaking point. He reached across the table to squeeze her hand. Don't blame yourself. Julian makes his own choices. Always has. That evening, a summer thunderstorm battered the city as Dahlia worked late in the community garden's small shed, rescuing seedlings from wind and hail. The garden would be gone by autumn. Meridian Partners had already posted demolition notices. But she couldn't bear to abandon it prematurely. Dahlia? A voice called from outside. Barely audible above the storm. She opened the shed door to find Julian standing in the rain.
Immaculate appearance.
Disheveled, rainwater streaming from his hair. You shouldn't be here, she said, but stepped aside to let him in. Water dripped from his clothes onto the packed earth floor as they faced each other in the cramped space, surrounded by gardening tools and seed packet symbols of the future. Plantings that would never happen. I wanted you to hear it from me first, he said. I've left the Foundation, Tomas told me. Julian, you didn't have to. I did. His voice was firm despite his bedraggled appearance. The board wants to preserve the status, co-protecting pristine wilderness, while ignoring the places where conservation and community intersect. I can't represent that vision anymore. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating his determined expression through the shed's single window. What will you do? Dahlia asked. Start over. Create something new. For the first time since she'd known him, Julian looked uncertain. I've purchased controlling interest in Meridian Partners. Dahlia stared at him in disbelief. You've what? It took everything, my inheritance, personal investments, even my grandfather's art collection. Charlotte called it financial suicide. A slight smile played at his lips. But as of this morning, I control 51% of Meridian's voting shares. But why? Dahlia whispered, afraid to hope. Because some things are worth fighting for. The garden stays, Dahlia. Not just yours, I'm rewriting Meridian's development strategy for all their properties. Green spaces, affordable housing, sustainable design. The words tumbled out with growing animation. The board was right about one thing: my approach wasn't aligned with the foundations. So I found another way. Dahlia struggled to process what she was hearing. You sacrificed your position, your inheritance, for urban gardens? Julian stepped closer, rainwater still dripping from his clothes. Not just for gardens, but what they represent. The idea that nature belongs everywhere, not just in designated wilderness areas. For the communities who need green spaces most. He reached for her hand. And yes, for you. Because you showed me what I'd forgotten, that true conservation isn't about protecting places from people, but connecting them to the land they live on. The storm outside intensified, rain hammering against the shed's metal roof. Inside, the air between them changed, charged with possibility and the shared recognition of how much had shifted since that first night at the botanical garden. I don't know what to say, Dahlia admitted. You don't have to say anything yet, Julian replied. Just know that whatever happens next with the garden, with Meridian, with you as its, your vision that made it possible. You planted the seed of something important, Dahlia. I'm just helping it grow. As thunder rolled across the city, Dahlia realized that, like the rare plants she cultivated, sometimes the most important growth happened underground. Invisible until the moment it finally broke through the surface. Full bloom, 1 year later, the Thornfield Botanical Gardens annual gala looked remarkably different. Instead of being confined to the main conservatory, the event spilled out into the surrounding grounds where native plant gardens now flourished. Tables adorned with Dahlia's signature arrangements were scattered throughout living exhibits, each telling the story of a local ecosystem. Your vision transformed more than just this event, Dr. Rosalind Patel commented as she and Dahlia strolled. Between displays showcasing urban conservation projects, the entire approach to botanical education has shifted. People don't just observe plants anymore, they connect with them. Dahlia smiled, pausing to greet a group of teenagers proudly explaining their neighborhood greening initiative to attendees. These young conservation ambassadors, many from her original community garden, were now paid interns through the newly established Silver Bell Foundation. Julian deserves most of the credit, Dahlia responded modestly, though pride warmed her voice. He found a way to make it sustainable. Speaking of Julian, Dr. Patel said with a knowing smile, I believe he's looking for you. Something about a surprise before his speech. Dahlia found Julian near the fountain where they'd first met, deep in conversation with Charlotte Devereaux. To her surprise, the exchange appeared amicable. Without the tension that had characterized their interactions during the tumultuous months of Julian's departure from the Blackwood Foundation. There you are, Julian said, his face lighting up as Dahlia approached, wore a tuxedo similar to the one from their first meeting, but with a boutonniere of native prairie grass and wildflowers pinned to his lapella, small tribute to their shared passion. Charlotte nodded cordially to Dahlia. I was just telling Julian that the Blackwood Foundation is interested in collaborating with Silver Bell on the regional seed banking initiative. Provided certain conditions are met, of course. Never does anything without conditions, Julian remarked with a wry smile after she departed. But in this case, her terms align with our goals. Both foundations working together could double our impact. That's unexpected, Dahlia observed. I thought she'd never forgive you for walking away. Charlotte respects results, Julian explained, guiding Dahlia toward a secluded path leading to the rooftop garden where he'd first shown her the botanical research program. And our results this past year have been hard to ignore. Indeed. The Silver Bell Foundation's innovative approach to integrating conservation with community development had garnered national attention. The model Dahlia and Julian pioneered had spread to 7 cities, with former vacant lots transformed into thriving green spaces that provided educational opportunities, improved air quality, and created ecological corridors for wildlife. As they climbed the spiral staircase to the rooftop, Julian seemed uncharacteristically nervous. Wanted to show you something before the formal announcement tonight. The rooftop garden had been transformed since their last visit. Instead of purely research-oriented plantings, It now featured a beautiful demonstration space where the rarest plants were displayed alongside information about their ecological significance and conservation status. At the center stood a mature, silverbell tree, the very one from Dahlia's original community garden, successfully transplanted against all odds. "How did you?" Dahlia began, touching its familiar bark in wonder. "Very carefully, with the best arborists in the country," Julian replied. "Wasn't easy, but some roots run too deep to leave behind." Beneath the tree sat a small bronze plaque, "The Dahlia Winters Botanical Education Center where conservation takes root." "The board approved it unanimously," Julian explained. "The entire education program will be restructured around your approach, connecting people to plants through stories, art, and direct experience." Tears welled in Dahlia's eyes as the significance of the honor struck her. From a struggling illustrator, delivering forgotten centerpieces, to having her name on a major botanical education initiative, the journey seemed impossible. "There's more," Julian continued, reaching into his pocket. "The personal matter." He retrieved not a ring box, as Dahlia had momentarily feared their relationship still felt too new, too precious for such formalities, but instead a small glass vial containing tiny seeds. "Buttonbush," he explained, naming the native shrub, whose spherical flowers had featured prominently in the arrangement that first caught his attention. "Extremely difficult to propagate, but resilient once established. The botanists say they'll thrive in that sunny corner of your garden." "Our garden," Dahlia corrected gently, taking the vial, "since you insisted on putting both our names on the deed." Below them, guests began assembling for the evening's presentations. Soon they would need to join the celebration, to speak publicly about conservation goals and foundation initiatives. But in this moment, surrounded by plants they had saved, together they shared a different kind of truth. "A year ago," Julian said quietly, "I thought I knew what mattered: preservation, protection, keeping things unchanged. Then you showed me that real growth requires change, risk, sometimes even uprooting." Dahlia slipped her hand into his. "She showed me that one person with resources and determination can change systems that seem immovable." "We make a good team," he observed, his voice carrying a question. "The best," she affirmed, answering what remained unspoken between them. As twilight deepened over the botanical gardens, they remained a moment longer on the rooftop, to people from different worlds who had found common ground where things could grow, like the rare plants surrounding them. Their connection had required specific conditions: honesty, courage, and the willingness to break new ground. When they finally descended to join the gala, they carried with them seeds of possibility for the gardens they would create, the communities they would serve, and the future they would nurture together, one careful planting at a time. Asterisk.